Hello and welcome to African Diaspora Discussions. I'm your host, Yasmin. Welcome to episode 2. Today we're going to be discussing being Black in white spaces, and I'm joined with a panel of 5. If you could just introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Kirsten. I'm a third-year dental student studying in Scotland.
Hi, my name is Layla. I am a postgraduate master's student living in Bristol.
Hi, my name's Tandy and I'm a nail salon manager based in Bristol. I'd show you my nails, but I took them off today, so.
Hi, I'm Wamui and I'm a master's student too, and I'm based in the US.
And I'm Sylvia, I'm based in London. I have a bachelor's degree and I'm currently working in the creative field.
Perfect, thank you very much all. As you all know, 2020 has been a explosive year for protesting in regards to race relations and police brutality. And because of that, many organizations and workplaces have tried to review their working environment to be more inclusive and have a bit more diversity. This is something that Black people have been talking about for many, many years, but I feel like it's only now becoming a bit more mainstream is finally being able to kind of have a look at themselves and try to find a way to be a bit more inclusive to people. So today I'm just trying to get a little bit of discussion going on, discussing, you know, how it is to be a Black woman, because we are all Black women here, navigating day-to-day life in a mainstream society or in white spaces. Just to kick it off, I'm going to ask Kirsten first. Growing up or just like in your adolescence, when did race become a factor to the point that you realized that the way you look will mean that that's how people are going to perceive you and treat you?
So I think that when I moved from London to Hertfordshire, I moved when I was about 12. So I moved from a predominantly very diverse area to an area that was very white. I don't know if any of you know Hitchin, but yeah, that's where I was based. And that was a massive culture shock for me at such a young age. And I think it affects people differently, but for me, it was definitely very detrimental to me. I was very, very out of place, and it was very apparent. Found it difficult to make friends initially. And I was just very alienated, but I didn't realize until much later that it might be to do with race, because my understanding of racism at the time is that, you know, if somebody's being racist to you, you'd know. Right. So I didn't really understand what discrimination was, and I spent a lot of my time trying to, oh, this not happened to me, it's because of whatever other things, you know, teenagers and stuff. So, but I think that's when I started to really think about it and feel it. Yeah.
Yeah. And what would you say that for your white school friends, for example, or your other people in the school, what would their understanding be for like who a Black person is? Because obviously Hitchin, from my understanding, is predominantly white. So is it that they just weren't accustomed to seeing Black people, or is it just something that stemmed from ignorance?
Stereotypes was a big thing. So I often had to dispute lots of big stereotypes that people had about me. People always wanted me to do certain things and, you know, to basically performative, like all the time. They want me to act a certain way, speak a certain way. They think I'm interested in certain things. And it's one of those things that I actually am interested in, I didn't feel like I could even speak about them, because everybody is always expecting that these are the things that I'll be into. And I found that quite difficult. And in terms of white people that I kind of interacted with at school, I always felt that they alienated me in very specific ways. But like I said, I only noticed until later. I didn't see it as that.
Yeah. Tandy?
Could I ask what interests, like, for example, like what you were interested versus what they stereotypically thought you'd be interested in?
So music is a big one for me. So I listen to all genres of music, not just hip hop and not just R&B. So I like rock, you know, I like hard rock, soft rock. I also like a lot of alternative music, a lot of world music from different cultures, and it's like just a way that I express myself. And at such a young age, I found it was very, very difficult to have conversations with people because they always just wanted to talk to me about hip hop and rap.
Sure.
And I'm like, that's not what I'm into necessarily, just because of my skin color. And that's probably the earliest that I started to pick up the stereotypes from, because that was something that I personally was interested in. So the music was something that I noticed it in, specifically.
Yeah. It's very interesting you say that, and I feel like a lot of people can resonate with that, having sort of to be performative in your actions and your interests to kind of be that stereotype that they have in their mind. Does anyone else resonate with that experience, trying to kind of having to be almost that token or that person that just like the stereotypical Black person that people will think like, oh, this is my understanding of what Black people are based on what the media has portrayed, therefore you fit into that box. Does anyone else have that experience?
I'd say like I resonate with that to a degree, but for me it was really weird because my family moved straight from Kenya to some really, really white towns. So up until I came to university, I was always in incredibly white spaces.
Sure.
And for me, I almost at times when I was like a preteen, I would cling to things like, even though I do have really diverse tastes, I would cling to things like hip hop and R&B because if it was the only places that I saw myself, because all around me, everyone was white. So then it was kind of like, these people don't understand me. I only had my family, and then like those stereotypical things to kind of look to as a kind of, oh, that like there are other people like me, you know?
Yeah, that's really interesting actually, because in a way, I feel like my childhood, I was also grew up in like a predominantly white area. And then when I eventually went to university, which was very, very diverse, I kind of felt at home and clung on to my culture and the music and the fashion and everything, because I felt like home. So it's definitely a two-way street, kind of like also trying to get closer to like the Black culture, let's say, in that environment. How did you learn, I'm throwing this out to everybody, how did you kind of learn to navigate those spaces? Were there any things that you kind of, coping mechanisms or just way to kind of interact with, you know, other people in predominantly white spaces, just to kind of make your day-to-day life a bit easier?
I'd say like, for me, like my parents raised me very much like, I don't know, I think this is for like a lot of Black people, definitely African people with African parents. There's that, you know, you have to do well in school, you have to be well spoken, you have to have the grades and things. So I grew up very kind of studious. That was my way. This is like trying to prove that I was not this stereotype that they thought that I was. But then also,
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, after you. I thought you were finished. Sorry.
No, go.
Oh, okay. Well, I felt as well, you were speaking earlier about being like interested in rock and stuff. Like I felt like I was interested in like growing up a little bit, like I like Taylor Swift and stuff like that. And I felt like when I was like in white environments, I like, even though I liked like say Sean Paul, you know, Beanie Man, like I was like, let me play Taylor Swift. Look, I like, and I feel like maybe I was overcompensating to be like, look, I like this music. It's not like, I'm not like all like, fuck the police, you know?
Yeah.
Like necessary. So overcompensating on that part.
Oh, definitely. I think I would put that underneath coping mechanisms in a way to kind of just, as you said, somewhat assimilate and somewhat just to kind of not be too obvious. Like, obviously, in a way, many aspects, you can be like the elephant in the room. But when you try to kind of be a bit more softer in regards to showing who you are, I think it's just a means to kind of cope and being in that environment, which sometimes can be like, you want to kind of just go underneath the radar and not be this kind of spokesman or figurehead to the Black race or Black people kind of thing. Ramu, how about you? Did you have any kind of experiences when you moved to the States in regards to kind of like navigating white spaces?
Yes. Actually, moving here was like the this is the most I've ever seen white people like at once. Because I basically grew up in Zambia from Africa, and I went to high school there and did some college. So at least when I was moving to the US, I was a little bit older.
Okay, sure.
So, but still, it was a shock because there were very few Black people in most of my classes when I first came. And even with the African Americans, it was a little bit hard to blend in because I was coming from a different culture, all that. So yeah, I did.
Yeah.
It was a real culture shock.
Yeah, definitely. I think anyone that's kind of moving, because for example, mine was the other way around, going from like predominantly white area to then kind of like a bit more diverse area. But it's definitely a culture shock, like most of you guys have said, just trying to like adapt and trying to fit into that environment. So to move on to like the working world, because with the whole protesting, like a lot of universities, you know, came forward, said that we're going to change, we're going to be more inclusive, but the main kind of sector or institution in society that really came through and said that we're going to have a like an in-depth review on how our systems are is the workforce. A lot of workplaces have a lot of microaggressions that happen, or unconscious biasing, or sometimes even blatant racism that happens within the workplace. It can be from managers or it can be from your colleagues, and it's very, very detrimental to, I think, anyone's mental health to go into a workplace and face somewhat of a discrimination or an unconscious bias. Like we all go to work, you know, to do what we have to do and go home, but to kind of battle through each day explaining your race, explaining your hair, explaining your features, explaining your culture, can be so exhausting, really. So does anyone have kind of any examples of being in a workplace where maybe people kind of in a way are very problematic, maybe racist, but kind of make it a joke? Because that's something that I faced. Like they add a little bit of humor to it to kind of make it seem like, oh, you know, it's not that serious. But in a working world, has anyone faced any experiences of just microaggressions or racism?
In my the first job I had, I think I was in a little bubble, and I was there for 4 years. But everyone, it was a very diverse workforce. We had diverse clients, and so I was there, and I was a complete bubble. And then when I decided to have a career change and go into construction, which is predominantly white and well male and predominantly white as well, that was the biggest culture shock for me ever. I work for a particular organisation, which I wouldn't name, or I should name and shame them, but I'm not going to. And I was there for 9 months. But we had all the different types of racism, microaggression, direct, covert, everything. And for 9 months, I worked, I think it was 5 different men, and I had all their different parts. We had one that was very obviously racist and would always say something. And it wouldn't be directed at me. It would be small things like, oh, Bristol isn't where I used to be. This is why I don't want to live here anymore. And like if we're driving past St Paul's or like certain areas of Bristol, he would just come out with all the biggest stereotypes about Black people, any person of any ethnic person basically, but mainly Black people. And I always used to wonder, like, do they notice that I'm sat here? Is he either blind, or is he doing it directly to kind of a microaggression? Well, it wasn't really a microaggression, but kind of is he doing it to, in front of me on purpose, or does he just not know what he's saying is completely out of order? Then I had the ignorant racist who would just come up with things that just didn't know any better, because he was happy to say, oh yeah, I'll go down to the pub after work, and everything I hear is from my mates down the pub. And I said, do you ever search stuff on your phone? I said, no, why would I do that? I just message people, use Facebook. I don't never read the news on the phone. And I was like, okay, well, he was the most easiest one to deal with, because at least with him, he was ignorant. So I kind of challenge him and speak to him about it. But he was the one who basically didn't want to know, and he didn't want to kind of change his views. That was the most difficult person, to the point where I had to walk off out of work for the day because I just couldn't handle any more of it. And then it kind of went up to the management, because they had diversity training kind of modules where you have to do different things about diversity or anything. But rather than getting the people to do it, middle management would do it for them so they can pass, because they were like, oh yeah, you know, they're never going to change, they're really waste their time. So I used to be like, well, they should at least try and do it. So I was like, well, you know, we don't really want to, but we have to do it by law. And again, they said all this kind of stuff in front of me, kind of negating for the fact that I'm a black woman, and they never knew whether they understood how much issues it was with it, or whether they just were ignorant and stupid.
Probably both. It's funny how I think I have had experience, please let me know if anyone else had that experience, just like what Layla said, is the fact that they somewhat feel comfortable to kind of say it in front of you, almost to say like you're okay, but the rest of you aren't. Like, I feel like it shocks me that people have the audacity and the comfort to kind of come to you and speak of ignorance and racism and just have this kind of spew out hatred. And they say to you, because you are in that working environment and you're kind of like somewhat build a rapport over the months or the years, they feel comfortable to say that. But that's the problem. Like, why do you think that they feel so comfortable to state their ignorance? Like, leaving that up to anyone to kind of speak on. Like, why do you feel like they feel comfortable to kind of speak ignorance in front of you?
I don't know if this is directly related, but I was going to talk about how in workplaces, I always have felt like in a box, not being able to speak out and defend myself. I mean, I think it is a personality thing, but not being able to defend myself because I feel like speaking out will get me into trouble. And I feel like people are comfortable to do it because it's so embedded in what they think is okay to say. And because there have been no real sanctions for people saying those things, there is no way that people are going to not think that it's okay. And the types of conversations I'm hearing, I was like, oh my gosh, what can I say about it? And then I remember coming home and I would speak to my mum about it, and my mum would tell me, you know, you can't say anything about it, you know, because in her experience, she's had sanctions and knows people who have had sanctions themselves for speaking out, you know, and it will just happen on the fly that, you know, you'll say something and then 3 months down the line, you'll be let go for whatever reason.
According to the office, sure.
They won't make it, they won't tell you you've been fired for this. And those type of stories that you've been told time and time again by your friends' family, you know, parents, those stick in you. So I just feel like people get scared to speak out, and also because we also don't maybe speak out as much, white people also don't get to learn or anything, even though it's their responsibility to teach themselves, but it's also part of the reason why they don't know. They just, you know, they can do whatever. Even managers and stuff as well. I had a manager come up to me and was like, oh my gosh, you know, I love your hair so much, I know that you don't like me touching it, but I'm gonna do it anyway. And I just stood there and I'm like, I didn't know what to say, you know, just awkwardly laugh and stuff, because you feel like if you want to. And also another thing that I struggled with is the perception that they have of you, and really and every day really, really hard to break away from that. I remember somebody calling me, my manager calling me lazy. And yeah, she called me lazy in an office where, because pretty much I went into the department and I would just help other people because a lot of them were older. I was like a younger person on the team, so I would try and help other people and teach them some computer stuff because we'd had a new system. And she didn't like the fact that I'd come in, was new, and was kind of helping all these people. I think she felt a little bit intimidated. But instead of it to be a thing of, because she's the manager, I mean, I get paid to do work, so you tell me what to do and I'll do it. Instead of doing that, she built up a narrative of me over the coming months, which I then had another manager then come and have a conversation with me about my work ethic and my drive at work. And then after having like a full conversation with her, then she realized that actually it's just because they should probably just move me to a different team because I would be much better placed in that team. But why do I have to deal with that after 6 months of working really, really hard to then have to defend the right to be somewhere based on somebody else's stereotypes, you know, that they want to perpetuate?
That's what, exactly. I mean, it's such a shame because at the end of the day, as I said before, like you come into a working environment to do what you have to do and leave, but then you also have to face these kind of allegations and stereotypes of your work ethic, and even just to narrow it down to just your facial expression or your body language or the way you speak. It's just like, why are you being so aggressive? Like, why are you speaking loud? And these times that's me. that's how I speak. And I think especially Black women have a lot of, you know, we face having to go into that kind of environment, to like predominantly white space, and having to kind of almost subdue our Blackness and subdue how we are, our mannerisms, the way we speak. And sometimes it can even come down to how we want to wear our hair. And just like you had experience, or someone kind of said, I'm going to put my hand in your hair anyway, that's happened to me as well. And I said, like, don't you dare put your hand in my hair, like, why? And they kind of laugh it off in a way that they feel like they have some sort of dominion and authority over your body. And I think it just definitely does go back to, you know, colonialism and slavery. People might think it's a reach, but it definitely does go back to Black women not being able to have that monopoly and have that power over their own bodies, which is a shame. Does anyone have any like other encounters like in work in regards to kind of just being in an office environment and just having to put up with just like ignorance and just like people saying certain things?
I mean, I think I can. Oh,
okay.
sorry.
No, you first.
Okay, so Andy.
I can definitely attest to some of the things Kirsten was saying. Like, I've worked in 2 really different industries, but I've sadly experienced similar things in both of them.
Yeah.
I worked for an events company for 6 years, and I was one of the few people that did speak out, and I was essentially fired for it. Even though they will tell you that I wasn't fired, I was fired for it.
Yeah.
And so I can understand why people are afraid, like, to speak out. When I went to my new job, I was afraid to speak out because I felt like I couldn't, you know, you say something and it is used against you. And I also did notice that I think generally there is a subconscious tendency, like with white people, to make assumptions about the caliber of a Black person's work and work ethic. That happens all the time. Like me and the new girl, we were both Black, and we were just constantly getting told, you're not doing enough, you're not doing it fast enough, there was always an issue. Even we could do the exact same thing as our colleagues, and it was never treated the same. So it was just really frustrating. And it was very interesting to work in that space because I was working with a lot of Latin Caucasian people, and they have like some very, very particular, I don't think they're aware of their own biases, but they have some really kind of particular views when it comes to people of like a Black background. And so it was like an uphill struggle. You know, I was constantly battling with these people without, like, whilst trying not to be like overtly rude, but trying to, you know, get a point across.
It's like props to you to standing out. I mean, I feel like a lot of us would want to, and feel like when you speak about it, like, oh, I'm not going to put up that. But when you're in the situation, sometimes like you think about the bigger picture, and like the fact that you were able to stand out, like even though it resulted in the way it did, like props to you, to be fair.
The saddest thing was, even in that situation, like there were a few other Black people there, but I didn't really have their support because they were trying to protect their own jobs.
That's exactly it. And that happens a lot. Tandy, how about yourself?
So my last manager was an absolute, I don't know if I can say that on this call. So to be fair, I worked in sales. So in sales, one good thing about it is that you can measure your work. Like, so month on month, I hit 75% of the sales of the sales team. Like, there was only 4 or 5 of us, and I was in an office with all white people and me. And every day my manager would say stuff like, would say stuff that, like, to question my ability, to question my work. And I said to her in the end, I got so mad, I was like, I said, and she said, why, Tandy, why have you not done all your work yet? Why haven't you caught up? We've all managed to do all our work and you're still working. I said, because 75% of the bookings come through me. I have more work. But she said, and I was like, you can look at it. I was like, there are reports, there are graphs. I said, like, 30 grand this month is coming via me, as opposed to £900 by you, 5 grand via Adam. If everyone hit what I was hitting, we'd hit target every month. I got kind of mad. But stuff like uniform, I remember I was head to toe in uniform, and tights are not uniform. So I don't wear tights because they rip and whatever. And I remember my manager absolutely chastising me for not wearing tights, which is not uniform, while the guy that I was walking with was literally wearing a Ted Baker suit. Not one item he was wearing was a uniform. I was head to toe in uniform, and I'm getting told off for an item that isn't even part of the uniform because it looks more professional. Like, and I look unprofessional. So, and then when my manager said loads of things like, you know, I think you should emigrate. Like, you know, she would tell me constantly that I need to leave the country. Like, she's like, I think you should leave the country. If you don't like it here, you should leave. There was another girl that complained about our government who was white, who didn't get told. She was like, why does she tell you that you have to leave the country every time you complain about how our country is run? And I was,
I think a lot of it, unfortunately, the reason why we face it from our colleagues is that in any workplace, if the managers or the people at the top are in a way racist, like call a spade, if they're racist or have problematic tendencies, that trickles down to, you know, colleagues underneath them and all the way down the hierarchy at a workplace. So if you have managers who are racist, say problematic things, everyone else thinks it's okay to say it. I mean, and also in regards to what you said about the uniform, like I've also worked in a workplace where the uniform standards didn't really take in consideration how it particularly look on a Black woman, for example, the makeup or the hairstyles, for example. And I think that's another problem with having a uniform standard anyway, because at the end of the day, if it's not inclusive to all shades or body shapes, then you're going to have people being called in and said like what you're wearing isn't uniform standard. Like you have, not to kind of divert into another topic, but like right now you have so many Black boys and girls who have been told to cut off their locks because it's not uniform standard, which is very, very problematic, because it's, in essence, is saying that, you know, your Blackness doesn't fit in here. Like they want you to straighten your hair, they want you to kind of assimilate, and if you are coming to school or to work with your natural hairdressers or hairstyles, they're kind of punishing you for it.
Especially when it's an issue. And that's, sorry, I want to say,
I
think it gets me annoyed because people need to start thinking and expanding their minds as to what racism in 2020 looks like. Right. Racism does not look like what the pictures that you see in the history books in your freaking you know what I mean, like British history is that's not what racism looks like. Racism looks like this, where we're talking about in workplaces where, you know, your manager is giving you microaggressions, or you have to question why you've been let go of your job, or dealing with like comments from your colleagues, and I think that it's one of this discussion to a lot of White people is like, oh my God, what are you saying? Oh my gosh, like that's not racist. Oh my goodness, I can't believe that's happening to you. Well, believe it.
Believe it's happening all day, every day. Well, I mean, how about you? Obviously, because we're all speaking from like a Black British kind of background, but you've been in the States. How has it been for you in regards to just like having maybe like unconscious biases or microaggressions at work or universities? Is that something you've faced before?
Yes, like when I was in uni, most of the time, like whenever white people would walk up to me, some people would just automatically assume that I speak French.
Oh, interesting.
So they would speak languages to me. I mean, I do understand French, but I don't speak it fluently. So I would always have to like explain to people like, we all don't speak French, like, you know, different cultures and stuff like that. And I have had a couple of people who've actually, I mean, not really been, no, they were offensive, but they asked it in a nice way. Like, the first time you ever had to like see the city, like how is it for you? And I would look at them like, I don't come from a bush.
Right.
And you kind of always have to tell people. So I stopped explaining it. I usually would just like pull out my phone and Google my city and be like, oh, here are the pictures. It's exactly like Cleveland. There's nothing different about it.
Exactly. No, that's really interesting. That's a whole another discussion in regards to how at work or at school or university you kind of have to explain where you're from and explain like the fact that you don't live in a hut, explain that you don't see elephants and monkeys on your way to school, explain that, you know, like all these misconceptions that's been fueled by the media and the news. And the thing is, it's a Eurocentric kind of ideology that needs to be maintained for them to have this conception of Africa, for society to be the way it is. Like, it's not in their interest to kind of have this idea of Africa being this like forward moving and modern place. In regards to you know, we spoke a little bit about being in the workplace, and have any of you ever felt like you are somewhat of a token in your workplace in regards to meeting a diversity quota? And what I mean by that is that when you apply for a job, you always have to kind of put like Black British or Black other, Black African, Black Caribbean, and you don't have to, but that's the options that is there. And sometimes people will say to me like, oh, just put Black British, so maybe, you know, you have more chances for you to get the job. And then when you get there, there's sometimes, especially if it's a white space, there's sometimes kind of like suggest that, you know, oh, I'm glad you're here because, you know, now we can be seen as more diverse. Like, has anyone experienced this kind of feeling of tokenism in an office or in an educational establishment?
I've experienced it before. I don't know if anybody had this experience, but I always used to get taken for the prospectus.
Yeah.
And that was kind of something I realized earlier on, and I used to like it, you know, oh my gosh, like I'm going to be on the front of the school, you know, so exciting, come home and tell my mom, oh my gosh, look. And I realized it's just all a ploy for diversity, you know. And the real issue isn't that there is an issue with putting me up for diversity, but the issue is what do you do to help the lives of those, you know, these diverse students in your school? How do you make their life better, knowing full well that we know educational institutions don't really know anything about anything when it comes to cultures and diversity and what we really need. And I was going to bring this up earlier when we talked about school, but at school I was very neglected. A lot of teachers neglected me all the time in terms of support, and there were many things that they should have been supporting me for and they never did. So when you contrast that to putting me on the prospectus so that we have more, you know, to basically show that we're diverse, it's just to tick the box, but to actually do the work and, you know, make sure that I feel included and stuff. A lot of the things I dealt with at school, people would like chiming African noises at me, and it was only till much later that I was like, oh, maybe somebody should have said something. And so in terms of that being the token, I felt like the token, and I felt proud being the token for many years. And then I look back and I think, but what did they actually do for me? And they didn't do anything.
Right. Yeah, Ayla.
I know you might touch on it a little bit later on about imposter syndrome, but the job I was talking about earlier, my first job in construction, I think because I was a woman, A, and a Black woman, B, or A and B together, I was also asked to be put on a website and have like brochures and all that. Like, look, we're really diverse. We have a woman and she's Black and she works in construction. We're hitting the 0.1% women and Black. But this was at the same time where I was facing different levels of racism and kind of, during my day of work. And even though management were aware of it, they kind of brushed it under the carpet. They were like, yeah, we kind of know, but like, this what we're going to really do about it, because they're good workers, and you know, like, you know, you can't really change them. That's just the time they grew up in. And so at the same time they asked me to do that, and I turned it down, and they were actually very annoyed at me for turning it down, like really annoyed. So when it came for me leaving the job, they refused to give me an exit interview. And at the time, because I just wanted to leave and I just didn't care, but at the time, I'm looking back, I didn't get a chance to tell like the top management. So this was all middle management. I never got a chance to tell them the reason why I had left, because no one basically followed up the reason.
No, it's a shame. It's a shame, and I think it, you know, like even if that is kind of like an example to show that even if they do have policies in place and legislations in place to kind of improve the working environment, it's up to that particular company to actually take on what the suggestions are. You know, we can go up to a you know, manager and say, this is my problems that I'm facing, and doesn't mean that they're going to do anything about it. Do you think it's the responsibility of, you know, the workplace? Because obviously the real problem here is people's views, is people's thoughts and how they perceive Black people. So they are obviously having their own ideologies and bringing that into the workplace. So do you think it's conducive, or do you think it would help if workplace imposes training, formal training to kind of combat this? Or is it more of a problem of mainstream society? You know, is it the media's fault for portraying Black people the way they are? Or is it the educational system to have a lack of Black British history, or just Black history in general? Like, where in society can we look at to say, like, this is where the problem is deriving from? Like, do you think training is a plausible, like, way to kind of combat racism within a workplace?
I think having Black people being the front man of, you know, speaking out about these things is a step in the right direction. A lot of the diversity things initiatives I've seen, maybe not so much now, but in the last few years, it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna do. But like, for example, when I did the NHS and you know, training and stuff, it's like I wasn't having a diverse person up on the panel teaching me about it. I was having, you know, this white person, you know, telling me all about how diverse the NHS is and and all that type of stuff. And that's all great and that's all good, but really and truly, we all have grown up under the same, you know, under the same umbrella of, we're being fed all these things by the media. So, and I think we're all a bit understanding of the fact that, you know, not everybody has the luxury of learning about all of these things or have known about all of these things. But in terms of what we can do from this point on, is that we can allow people to have voices, because a lot of the time, the issue isn't so much that I have things to say, it's that people don't want to listen when I speak about them, because they want to talk about it themselves. White people want to talk about what it's like to be Black when they're white, like, and that's the hardest thing. So I found that in a lot of workplaces, that they always want to have the voice. They want to be the ones to speak for you. And that's the real issue. If you really, really want to help, we need to let Black people be able to speak for themselves, so that we can actually teach, and we can, you know, it's just tiresome for us to have to keep, you know, biting our tongue and saying things all politely and stuff, when actually a lot of understanding from the other side would go a long way. If somebody's upset about something, you just let them be upset. You don't try and manage their feelings and stuff, because they're just accept, like, you need to accept your wrongdoing, and then we can all move on.
Definitely. I mean, like, I've also definitely had that experience where, you know, you presented to your workplace that this is an experience of, this is a racist incident that's happened in your workplace, rather than to them to say, okay, who is this? How are we going to sort the problem? Is more to do, they would more rather respond by saying, well, everyone can have their own personal opinions, and, you know, you can't stop people thinking or saying what they want, which is very problematic in itself, because at the end of the day, no one should have to tolerate abuse and racism from their colleagues, especially if it's like a company that's international, working with a diverse, you know, range of people, which is a shame. So,
and we're dealing with it every single day, single day, because I'm hearing people say things like, oh, but it's just the one comment, and can't you let this slide? I've been letting it slide for the entirety of my life. When will I sleep, and when will I rest?
Yeah, that's why I always suggest, and I'm an advocate to Black people, that call it out. Like, don't kind of let it go and be like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, oh, it's fine. No, call it out. Tell your manager, cry to your manager, say this person said this. That's what they like. They want to hear it. And the thing is that if you say something, when the next Black person comes along and says, you know, this person said that, then at least there's a stronger case. There's a strong case for that to be a bit more serious. Tandy, yourself, what do you have to say?
I think, like, white people should call out racism that makes them uncomfortable and not expect the Black person to do it. Because it was me that every day got told I needed to emigrate, that like this, and everyone, not gonna lie, like they looked at me like, they did look like, are you going to say something to that? Like, I think everyone's been there where white people have been like, oh, you're going to say something to that.
Sympathy,
like, are you going to say something to that?
Exactly.
Do I? Because every time she makes these comments, which is all day, every day, you want me to say, like, they look at me, and then when I don't react, then they're, oh, okay, it's all fine. And I'm like, no, because you realize how much I would have to say something to that. Like,
oh, that's so true. Again, like, it's not the responsibility of a Black person to kind of end racism, something that we didn't create. So if you are a white person and you consider yourself an ally to Black people and their struggle, if you see some injustice happening, or you see a Black person having bad comments or anything bad happen to them, speak out. I mean, like, this protest that happened, kind of to make it a bigger picture, the protest that happened this summer, it was very intergenerational, interracial, interfaith, like everybody was out protesting. And I think there's a misconception that it's up to Black people to kind of solve the issues and the ailments of racism, but it isn't. So I completely agree with you. White people should also stand up for their friends or the people that they see that, you know, experiencing injustices. Sylvia, is there anything that you, like, obviously you had already had an experience of kind of calling it out. What do you think a solution is to kind of a workplace, or how to kind of have a workplace be a bit more tolerant and inclusive?
I mean, it's difficult. Like, I think, people just have to listen and speak out, but like people have to be sincere, like in their approaches, I guess. I think one of the problems we saw with like the protests and stuff was like there was a lot of performative activity, you know, people acting like they were on side because of it was in the moment, but it wasn't real, you know. And now you think people, they're not saying anything, and so then it becomes pointless. So I mean training always seems a little bit performative, but I guess if it was coming from like real people with real experiences, then maybe it could be something real. But I don't know.
You, Leila, any ideas of how to reform workplaces or other institutions in society to kind of like somewhat fix people's misconceptions and just like bad stereotypes that they have of Black people?
Okay, that's a big question.
But
mainly I was going to say, because I know, not to kind of fix the system, but one thing that I personally think will help would be when you're applying for work, not to have to put your name, because I think already before you've even got the job, you're already kind of disadvantaged when they see your name. It's like, oh, that's a different name. To the point where when I was applying for work, I just stopped putting my name. I just put my initials because it was interesting to see how many more responses I got. Well, they thought I was just called LY rather than.
But it's like, I don't know, it's kind of, like, I agree, but I also think it's really sad that we can't use our name. Like, we shouldn't have to. I thought about changing my name because if I've been rejected, I've had phone calls where they literally were like, oh, where are you from? Where's that name from? And it's kind of like, why are you asking me those questions? But I do kind of, I don't know, maybe it's the stubbornness in me, but I'm like, I shouldn't have to hide my name. Like, that's unacceptable.
I agree because I was going to say something that I've realized is that for me personally, I'm going to stop enabling racism where I see it. So I don't want to work in the institutions that I feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have to put, maybe, but I don't want to normalize that. It's hard enough already as it is, especially because I'm in healthcare. If I'm going to be trying to save people's lives, I need to make sure that my life is also important where I'm working. You know, especially with the demographic I'm working for. If that's the case, then my life needs to be important too. So whilst I do agree that taking away names and stuff would be good, you know, but it's not a thing where everybody would be doing that. You know, if it's a rule for everybody, that's different. But for only Black people to be then, you know, thinking about, I don't think that we should enable and encourage discrimination, because if I put my name down and I don't get hired, that's fine. I don't want to work for you anyway. If you know what I mean, if you see my name and you think that's why you want to. So, and that's something that I've been trying to, I think as Black people, we can definitely try and encourage that sort of thinking in terms of diversity. Don't put yourself in a place where you're uncomfortable. Just be a little bit more aware of I know that I've been a culprit of it for many years of my life. Yasmin knows this, where I just enable racist comments and racist things time after time. And I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. If I will have no job, okay. But I just think that that's something that we as Black people can do, is really putting our foot down. We're good enough to be able to create our own things. So I think that that's a step in the right direction from our point of view in terms of what we could do. That was
I think I definitely sit on the fence on this one, because I hate the idea that I have to kind of like think to want to remove my name. But then on the other side, I don't know the statistic offhand, but statistically, Black and brown people, or not even Black and brown people, people with foreign names are less likely to be employed, even if they're more educated, even if they have more experience, even if they're more well fitted for that position. And unfortunately, people are getting jobs based on their name, based on their race. So I hate the fact that it would be a suggestion to not put your name there, but the reality of it is that, you know, you want to think that you can work for a workplace that's diverse and inclusive and like likes all people, but that's a very small puddle. Like, it's already a small puddle of like people who, for example, employ women, and then it's another even smaller puddle for people who have like a foreign sounding name. So I definitely sit on the fence. I mean, I think I'll definitely try it in the future, because at least you get further. I think if you put your foot in the door and you have a interview where you're face to face, and they can still deny you that job when you know that you're even overqualified for that job, then that's just them like shooting themselves in the foot, really.
But we do that at uni, don't we? We don't put our names, we have a student number. So you know when you're getting your essay back or your exam back, you know there's not the merit of who you are. So it could be for anyone, not just maybe Black people. It could be for anyone with any kind of foreign sounding name or no foreign sounding name. And the same with CVs. We used to have to put photos on them, but that's something that's been like, you don't do that. The same way that maybe eventually you're not allowed to put your date of birth. Well, you're not allowed, but you're not supposed to put your date of birth. So eventually I think they will trickle down all this kind of information where, look, you just see where you've gone to school, how your attainment levels and the skills you have, and you based on that, and then the interview, they will see your face and they will know who you are. And if you know you're qualified for the job but you don't get it, then you know that you can work that out. But just kind of getting your foot in the door,
that's important too.
But I think generally you need more, like, you just need more diverse people in higher spaces at the end of the day.
People.
Because if you have like elderly people or Black people or brown people who are at the top, then they're not going to have those kinds of biased views. My sister's worked in recruitment for years, and she obviously does her best to kind of push people forward that like might not get those opportunities. And she's seen how in a lot of companies they will do things like say, oh, we don't want, you know, a Sikh person at the top of the company, or we don't want this. And that is one of the biggest issues. You have these companies that are completely run by a bunch of white guys, and so they essentially have the say on everything that goes.
So it's a tricky one, really, because in an ideal world you would want it to be diverse in age, in race, in faith. You want it to be kind of somewhere like you're there based on your merit. But unfortunately, the people who are doing the hiring are somewhat of the gatekeepers, and unfortunately, the gatekeepers in today's society are mainly white men. So it usually comes down to them. But in the ideal world, I definitely think that if people are employing based on credit and based on like the experience, then that will obviously do a lot of good for society and also the working environment. Like, for you to kind of not employ someone who's suited for the job based on their skin is like, as you said, would you really want to be working there in the first place?
I was just gonna make this point about how, but sometimes it's also hard for us black people to work so hard to get to a really, really high space. And the journey of getting there is so tiresome and so tedious and so long and painful and arduous that once you get there, to then have to then tackle this massive hill of diversity in a workplace, sometimes I just think that it's just too much. So I feel like there are a lot of Black people, I say a lot of Black people, probably not a lot of Black people, but Black people who are in managerial positions, who I just feel like it really shouldn't be their responsibility, or do you know what I mean, to have to deal with this all on their own. Because really and truly, to get to where they have to get to, the things that they have to do, in order to be, for example, like if I wanted to be a consultant, the number of years I would have to put in, and then on top of that, to get my own practice, and being a Black woman and then also being a business owner is so hard. I'm just thinking, will I even have the energy, do you know what I mean, to be battling this type of thing? When actually, if I had a team around me who were also driven to do the same thing, who weren't Black, I think that would go such a long way.
Actually, I actually started noticing just concerning what you guys are saying. Like, I have put in a couple of applications recently, and I have noticed that even on the part that asks you about race, like, are you African American, Black, Hispanic, there's actually other. And on several occasions, I've had to click other because I don't want to say I'm white, Black, because then I just want to see if I am actually going to be called for the interview despite my name being foreign. But it's just like, I mean, you're probably going to tell from my name, but sometimes I just click other, even when it comes to sex. I started noticing when you say female or male, I usually, if I have the option to say other, I'm like, let's just see if I'm going to get a call back, because I don't want to be judged like, oh, she's female, she's foreign, she has a foreign name, and then she's Black. So sometimes if I have that option, I purposely click on other just to see if I'm actually going to get a call back for the job.
Exactly. I mean, it's unfortunate, but I do think it's a little thing that you could do to kind of further yourself in that whole, like from application to interview to getting the job. I think it's a step in the right direction. It shouldn't be like that, and it's unfortunate, but unfortunately you're kind of faced with a society where people are just prejudiced and have this like racist ideologies and kind of do want to keep Britain white, for example. So sometimes, or even US white, for example, but it sometimes can help. Just to wrap our discussion up, just going to go around for each of you to kind of say your last words in regards to just what advice can you give to, for example, someone who's entering the world of work, or for example, even advice to white people to be less problematic to Black people in work? Like, how also do you feel like it's best to kind of navigate that space? What are little things that you tell yourself or you do to kind of just get through your day-to-day life? Starting with Kirsten.
Something I've been telling myself a lot recently is like not to normalize chaos in my life and hardship and stress in my life. So in workplaces, if I'm thinking that something is, you know, out of my depth in terms of what I should and shouldn't be dealing with, you know, when it comes to racism, I have told myself that I don't need to be there and deal with that, because I now see how traumatic it is for me and how traumatic it is for people who look like me, and I don't want to deal with that anymore. I think speaking out is really important. Speaking about experiences, not shying away from speaking out because it will upset somebody. Just say them, because I think that we can all agree that our experiences are very much validated now. Many years ago, I didn't think that my experiences were valid, and I didn't think that I could speak about them. And it took many, many years before I felt comfortable to speak about them. So I think that I would probably tell people my age to start speaking about how they feel about racism, and not to take no for an answer.
Right, definitely hear that. And yourself, Layla?
Similarly to you, Kirsten, I would say don't stay in a toxic work environment or uni environment if it's kind of having a negative effect on you. I don't think there's any shame in leaving a workplace because, you know, it's tough having to go to work every single day and having to deal with being racist towards you. So if the environment is no longer serving you, leave. At the same time, I feel like It's always the kind of thing that a Black person will be the ambassador for every Black person, and it's really tough. You always have to do extra than any other person.
Yeah.
And again, I guess we're kind of brought up to believe that. But again, sometimes that can also be a bit stressful. So just kind of do you, and just, yeah. If nothing is serving you, then kind of think about your own well-being and health, and no shame in leaving.
Definitely, mental health trumps all, work, experience, or money. And Tandy, how about yourself?
My best advice that I think I got is to write it down with the dates and the times.
Yeah.
Because when I got made for everything, because someone told me, and I was like, oh, I've missed half of, like, not that it's good, because it's not, but like, the big ones. I was like, oh, I've missed some of the big ones. But I was like, let me start from now. And basically, when I got made redundant, I know this is a bit like at this point my job was already gone, but I got made redundant. I was like, let me just send this email with my bullet points, dated and timed. And my manager got fired too.
It's the small. That's it. Don't feel bad calling out racist managers. Like, don't feel bad. Do it.
I liked my position. That was the hardest part, is that the problem was I loved the job, and it's probably one of the first jobs I've ever had where I actually loved what I was doing. And I just could not get on with this woman. So I did feel a bit of power writing it down, being like, lady, you are lucky I have not sent this email.
No, that's really good advice. Definitely always write down any encounters or any incidents that you've had. Write it down, the name, the date, and possible witnesses, because if it does escalate and you need to kind of call out a manager or a colleague, at least you have proof and evidence. But maybe any final kind of advice or any sentiments in regards to being Black in white spaces and navigating?
I always just tell people, like, just be yourself. And at the end of the day, like, people will accept you for who you are. And for those who don't, you just keep your distance.
Exactly.
That's all I can say.
Yeah.
I always just tell people, hey, play it safe. I mean, get to know your environment, get to know who's good for you and who's not. And just figure it out.
That's great. Completely agree. Just be yourself, and that's nothing. Black women or Black people in general shouldn't have to change themselves to fit in. Like, come as you are. If they accept it, great. If they don't, great. And Sylvia, lastly, yourself, any closing sentiments?
I guess I'm just gonna piggyback off what everyone else has said. I agree that you should definitely document things if you feel like you are being discriminated against. That is crucial. Be vocal and just like support each other, I guess. And don't let things get to you. What Layla said, definitely, if an environment isn't serving you, then leave. Because if I definitely have fallen into the trap of feeling like I had to prove something, and it was detrimental to me. So,
definitely. And I mean, like, we've all been told, like, as a Black person, that we have to work twice as hard. But if that twice as hard is detrimental to your mental health or just your happiness, your well-being, then just try and remove yourself from that situation. It's a shame that we didn't even have to work twice as hard. They kind of just be on par with their mediocre, average work standards that they're giving out. But thank you all so much for joining me on African Diaspora Discussions. Your thoughts, opinions, and comments have been very, very beneficial to us all. And if you would like, well, I'm going to put your details down below to see your @. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.